Creepy, but not the worst part. I lived there for about another year, and I never saw her again. After I had moved out, I was hanging out with my one roommate who had the bedroom at the end of the small hallway, right next to the bathroom. We were talking and I told him that I never felt comfortable in the apartment after something happened. To which he responded, "Oh, you saw her too? I nearly drove off the road when I heard this." We then both described her, finishing off each other's sentences describing her. He had seen her twice. I was indifferent about ghosts before that. Now I believe in them, or believe in something. It was very creepy, and every time I tell the story the hairs stand up on my arms. 4. My brother was on the phone once with his GF when she started saying that she could hear some old lady asking my brother for a glass of water. There was nobody around him, so he ignored it, but she kept on insisting. He hung up the phone and went to check on our grandma, who was in her bedroom, and found her dead. Fast forward a couple of years, around 11 p.m., I was on the phone with a girl when I saw a guy on a bicycle go past. Phone was by the windowsill. Same spot as my brother. That's when I noticed she stopped talking and asked her if she was still there. She apologized as she thought I got into trouble. I said no and asked why she said that, and she replied with, "Someone was telling me to stop talking on the phone, it's late. Go to bed." I was on my own, everybody in the house was already asleep. I asked her if it was an old lady and she said yes. Told her it's my grandma and that the same thing happened to my brother. She started talking about ghosts and stuff, so I told her I'm hanging up and bolted into my room. 5. When I was 6, I slept on a bunk bed in a room alone. The bottom bunk was empty, was meant for my younger brother, but he was too scared of sleeping in a bed alone. So I was alone in that room that night. I remember a chilling feeling that night, then it suddenly got really warm, probably because I was undergoing a night terror of some sort. Then I start breathing heavily and open my eyes and see the room is empty. My little night light in the corner of the room comforts me back to sleep, except as I close my eyes I felt a heavy hand petting my shoulder. My eyes rip open and there was no one in the room. As soon as I lay back down, the petting continued and I covered my head, just pretending to myself that it was my mom. It took me 12 years to stop sleeping with my head under the covers because of that memory. My mom, of course, knew a woman passed away in that apartment before we moved in, so she always believed it was that woman trying to comfort me. 6. My parents had flown to Houston when I was 11 years old to see a specialist for my dad's lymphoma. It had just returned from remission, but there was no reason to think he was in any imminent danger. I was riding my bike home the day they were to fly back and stopped my bike in this ditch we used to ride down/up on our way back. When I got to the top, I felt a wave of emotion come over me, and without even knowing what I was saying, I told my friend I was riding with that my dad had just died. My friend was like, "What?" I just knew. I rode the rest of the way home to find my grandparents, my dad's parents, bawling on our back porch. I stood there watching them in the doorway for a few minutes, unable to walk out to talk to them. He had died an hour before I got home from school. No phone calls to the school, nor did I interact with anyone that knew prior to riding in the ditch. I just knew when that wave came over me. Again, there was no reason to think he was even remotely close to passing. He had caught pneumonia while in Houston and died from that. 7. Late one weekend night, my parents were out at a party, so it was just my sister and I home. I heard my parents come home, so like a kid I instantly shut off all my video games and pretended to be asleep. As a kid, I always went to bed with the little lamp on. I hopped in bed and pretended to be asleep when I heard someone enter my room and head for the light on my dresser. Their back was to me, and I saw they were reaching for my lamp to turn it off. Just as I had that thought, they turned around and looked directly at me and stared for what felt like forever. I couldn't see much detail. I was peeking through my closed eyes as discreetly as I could, other than a large old-timey looking brown dress, like Victorian era, and what looked like the face of an old woman with their eyes where it was very dark and I couldn't make out any details. I saw them smile at me and then shut the light off before I fell asleep. The next morning at breakfast, my parents said they were surprised that I fell asleep with the light off since normally I left it on. I asked everybody in the house if they did it and no luck. I have no idea how to explain it to this day. What's even more bizarre is recently I found a picture of my great-grandmother who died of old age some 40 years before I was born. She was wearing a dark Victorian-style dress in the image. 15. When I saw this thread, I thought about my experience in Turkmenistan for work. I was in the capital of Ashgabat, waiting for my apartment lease to be approved by the local council, so I had to stay at their hotel. For context, Turkmenistan is also one of the toughest countries to get into, and this was post-pandemic, so even their biggest hotel that used to house dignitaries was also empty and dusty. I fell asleep after video calling my boyfriend. I was awoken with my duvet lifted from one edge, bringing half of it diagonally midair and almost wavy, all while hearing chants by a male voice in my left ear in a language I didn't understand. It was so fast and rough. I tried reciting all the prayers/Quranic verses I could. I was born Muslim, but I don't practice anymore, and it stopped for a short second, only to begin again with almost a mocking laughter in between the chants. At the same time, I could feel my left hand fingers being pulled repeatedly. It ended as the sun rose. I immediately called my friend who was 3 hours ahead in time zone to just debrief and process what the fuck just happened. Told this to some friends and local colleagues, and yes, they theorized some regional jinns. Of course, I checked the fuck out of there that morning and moved into a staff boarding house. Most terrifying experience of my life. 16. My dad would have laughed at you if you told him you saw a ghost, until he did. He used to work late hours as a mechanic in a building that used to be a machine shop in the 20s or 30s. It was 2+ stories high, and the owner had built an apartment into it and lived there. The apartment was built on top of the parts room and phone salesman's room. It was at one end of the shop. There were stairs leading up to the entrance to the apartment, and a small bathroom right at the door at the entrance to the stairs. One night, Dad is working after midnight, and he hears this loud banging. He looks up to the source of the noise, and sees the door to the apartment is open, as is the door to the bathroom. He goes up and looks, and the toilet seat is raising itself up and then slamming down. Dad watches a while, then goes back to turning wrenches. The racket keeps up, so he just turns his radio up louder and ignores it. A week or so later, he's working after midnight again, and out of the corner of his eye notices some gray, human-sized, misty thing floating across the shop floor. He watches it, not looking directly at it, for a bit, and it stops at one of the vehicle lifts. It starts playing with the lift, making it go up and down. Dad then looks directly at it, and it disappears. It showed up many more nights, mostly just wandering, occasionally playing with the lifts. Often when Dad left, he would leave a part out that he was going to work on. For instance, he had disassembled a water pump and was waiting for a rebuild kit to come in so he could repair it. But when he came back in the following day, the part was put back together again. One time he left an alternator on his workbench, and when he came back in the next day, it was neatly disassembled. After talking with his coworkers and the owner, he found out they all had similar experiences. Also, there was a dim, back warehouse in the place where the owner stored some old cars for parts. I started going back there one day, just to explore, and immediately had a cold, don't go in there feeling. I went and got the shop dog to join me, an incredibly smart German Shepherd, and went back. The dog refused to go in. It whimpered a bit, it growled a bit, and it slunk away. I asked the owner about it. He just smiled and said, "Yeah, don't go back there." 17. Once upon a time when I was in my 20s, I was severely addicted to heroin. I was homeless, so a friend of my mom's let me crash in her empty unit in a building that once functioned as her apartment and hair salon. It was a storefront in a trendy downtown neighborhood in an old, yet updated building. The front of the building held the salon chairs in a row up front and small bedroom with a bathroom in the back. I brought a mattress inside and got my blankets and headed down for rest in the back bedroom. I woke up around 4 a.m. to use the restroom and had the overwhelming sensation I wasn't alone. I can't explain it. It wasn't blurred by the drugs. I felt it in my spirit. I figured it was because I woke up in a new space and shrugged it off. I went back to the bed and adjusted my eyes to the darkness, and I started seeing shadows move on the ceiling. I kept rubbing my eyes and doubting myself. I figured I was just flipping out because I was sobered up now, scared and alone. This went on the next couple nights, odd creepy feelings in this place, especially being watched, odd shadows on the ceiling, but I was able to get high, sleep and not deal with most of it. I still felt uneasy though. But when you have a free place to lay your head, have heat, water and do your drugs in peace in, you place that ahead of everything else. One evening, I came back after dancing at a club to support my pitiful habit. I was exhausted, for the most part pretty sober and ready to settle down. I showered, tucked into the bed and was scrolling mindlessly when these weird slapping noises started in the salon room. Sounded like someone was slapping the hardwood flooring. It took every ounce of courage to peek around that corner out into the storefront of chairs. The noise stopped as soon as I got to the doorway. I walked into the salon chair area and noticed an old cable cord coming out of the floor. This was in the area the noise was coming from. I get a terrible gut feeling, and I knew damn well I couldn't handle it if this cable starts moving in front of me, so I fly to the bed and jump in. I was shaking to death. I contemplated running past that room to the back door into my car. I knew I'd have to put on more layers, grab shoes since it was freezing, but sounded too time-consuming. I thought of calling 911 and having them help me. I even had paraphernalia in there too. I didn't give a damn. I was willing to sleep in the winter cold in my vehicle with no gas in it. The slapping starts again, and then I realize it's definitely that damn cord. Had to be. The sounds made sense for it. It felt like it was antagonizing me. I sat there shivering on that stupid mattress, listening, head under the blanket, trying to make sense of what is happening. Did someone break in? No. I feel something in here not human, I know it. Then it stops and it's silence for a good 30 seconds. I just knew in my mind it was making its way in the back bedroom I was in. I feel like it felt me out a few days and was making its move. It was time. All of a sudden I felt a heaviness in the space between myself and the wall, like someone leaning over me, looking. I knew it was threatening. My insides told me my fight or flight is kicking in now. I shit you not, I heard, right in my face, a low growling. I have chills now telling it. It was evil. Pure anger. I flew up screaming like a banshee fighting the air and ran out the back door to my car and cried my eyes out. I made a friend get my things with me. I can't explain how a presence feels, but your soul feels it. I or not. I never suffered hallucinations on opiates. Ever. This was something. 18, my fiancé at the time, and I went to visit my dad. He had just bought a property built in the 1800s as a place to eventually modernize and sell. It was still in great shape, and he invited us to stay there for the weekend instead of bothering with a hotel. We arrived and, tired from our drive, pretty quickly found the master bed and bathroom to get ready for bed. While using the restroom, I noticed some cold drafts and heard some rhythmic pacing like sounds coming from the wooden floors. I brushed the cold off without thought at the time and assumed my fiancé was just looking around room, even though the walking sound was more like a boot than a foot with socks hitting the floor. At any rate, we both went to bed and fell asleep pretty quickly. At some point, my fiancé is nudging me in the side, "Sweetheart, sweetheart." She is whispering but has an urgency in her voice. I opened my eyes and my heart and blood went cold for a second. There is a faint white figure standing there, just looking at us at the foot of the bed. We both saw it as clear as day. What was even more jarring is that same draftiness I felt before was back. The figure had a feminine essence and somehow an 1800s look. Fiancé and I held hands under the covers, just sort of both awkwardly caught off guard. The thing we both remember now, aside from being a bit petrified, is that what didn't sense any hostility or malice, just a good 10 minutes of holy crap. The figure stayed relatively still, just sort of shifting her head back and forth like you would while looking at an item at a sale or something interesting. Then as suddenly as everything started, the figure just went away. The rest of the time there we noticed other odd sounds and slept downstairs in the living room, all lights on. My dad also had a Corvette stored in the carriage house, but my fiancé insisted there was a bad energy, so we never went in and took it out for a spin. 19. Camping at a friend's family property with a group of friends. They had a huge dingy shop full of old tools and old furniture that was super creepy. Dirt floor, clown paintings in the loft, not even kidding. We stayed up late drinking by the fire and I was the last one awake. Went to go pee on the side of the shop and stood about 5 feet away looking inside through the window. There was a fluorescent light on and I noticed what looked like a piece of paper or dollar kind of floating around. I thought it was a moth at first, but it was moving in a very flowing figure 8 pattern that was very rhythmic. It reminded me of dangling a carrot. I watched it for maybe 20 seconds, which felt like forever. Then it quickly floated back to the corner of the shop where it was dark. There was also a wood chair near the corner that added to the creepiness. Could have been a moth though. I sat back down by the fire to finish my beer and have a smoke. No one else was awake, so I played Robot Unicorn Attack 2 on my phone for a while. I noticed my friend Mark pop out of his tent to pee, then go back in to go to sleep. I decided sleep sounded good, so I went to my tent and fell asleep. The next morning, we were having breakfast and Mark said, "I saw you guys sitting by the fire super late. How late did you stay up?" I told him I was probably 2 or 3 a.m. Then he said, "Who was up with you?" I told him I was the last man standing. He said, "I got up to pee and saw you on your phone and 2 people over your shoulder watching you play." He said one person looked bigger, so he thought it was one of our friends, who was a bigger dude. He said the other person was taller and skinny, but none of us are noticeably tall or skinny. Freaked me out. We still camp at that property once a year, but I don't go in the shop, and I go to sleep whenever my wife decides she's tired. 20. My mom, for my entire life, said that when she died she was going to haunt us. She was a strange cat, and she went through life believing she was a medium and could see ghosts. Growing up in that, you'd think I thought I had the coolest, kookiest mom ever, but she did it to the point it was embarrassing, and it turned my brother and I into huge skeptics. When our mom would say that when she crossed over she'd send us a sign, we naturally said, "Yeah, okay, how will we know it's you, then?" Her response was always, "You'll just know." Fast forward to 2015. My mom dies on the anniversary of this huge house fire she was in as a teen. Growing up, she always talked about the fire, and clearly it left an impression on her. 24 hours after she dies, it's 1 a.m. and my spouse and I are asleep in our apartment. Suddenly we wake up to the sound of a smoke alarm. It's exactly as scary as it is in movies, let me tell you. We wake up and jump into the living room where the alarm is, and instead of being greeted by smoke and fire, it's cold, so cold. It's January in New England in a crappy old multifamily house, so of course it's cold. But there was one smoke detector just going off by itself. My spouse goes to press the button to stop it, it doesn't. Again and again. Eventually he takes out the batteries, and I swear to you, that alarm went off for another 3 to 5 seconds, which is an eternity for something with no battery, even if you count for residual discharge. It was the weirdest thing. A few months later my brother and I are talking about mom and her ways, and I ask him if anything weird happened to him after mom died. And he said that the night after she died, his TV kept turning on and off by itself. To the point he'd go to bed, the TV would turn on, and he'd have to get up and shut it off a few times. Around the same time as my smoke alarm situation, It's so strange now, as a somewhat rehabbed skeptic. I just know that was my mom giving us the sign she always said she would. I still don't know if I really believe in ghosts, but I believe in whatever that was.